Welcome to another edition of the Mailbag from the workshop this time, and we've got a fair few comments to get through. But before we get through those today, normal parish notices. So, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when this sort of content or other content hits the channel, that's the bell icon is the one you should be hitting. If you like the content of this video or any other video you watch on the channel, give it a thumbs up. It really helps. Become a member of the TMTG community. The address is down there, as are the Instagram and Facebook pages, or Instagram and Facebook pages, whichever way around it is. Go over there. You'll see all the shenanigans of the channel are notified on those platforms. But now back to the video. So the next one comes from Just Dope. I love that. That's a great name. And this is in response to the Ensoniq waterfall video I did right at the beginning of this year, in January 2020. And he asks, how is the velocity response on the SQ2? As he was probably going to pick one up in the next few days. Now, this was left about 2 or 3 months ago, I have to be honest. And there's, it's quite incredible, actually, the comments and the detail in the comments that you guys go to. That actually forces me to actually really think about how I respond to you. Which is not a bad thing, because that's what this channel was all about. It's all about the interaction and the gear. And I have to be honest and say I picked up an SQ2, and it's not here. It's in storage. So it was here for a while earlier in the year, just before I kind of moved in, and then I had to rationalise what was here and what's in storage. So, if I'm honest, in my opinion, there are better keyboards out there than the SQ2 for MIDI control, and not probably cheaper, but just better. I said on the video in a response to Sean Curran the other day that, in my opinion, the D20 keyboard was better than the Ensoniq EPS16 keyboard. And he and I have a difference of opinion over that, because he remembers the Ensoniq keyboard was better than the D20 keyboard. But then on the flip side, I have to kind of go with the EPS16 that I have against the D20 that I have. And I think my EPS16 has seen a fairly rough life. And then I come to the SQ2. And again, I think even though this one looks like it's been much better looked after in terms of the keyboard itself, do I think it has a better key? Do I think it's a great keyboard in terms of the key bed? No. For me, again, there are better keyboards or key beds out there than that. And if you're going to use it as a MIDI controller, this is the other kind of point I would say, is if you want a MIDI controller, then my advice is probably go and buy a MIDI controller. Now, there are some good ones and there are some bad ones, but go and buy a MIDI controller, because if that's what you're going to use it for, you want something that is dedicated to that function. Whether it be via the 5-pin DIN or whether it be via USB, you want something that actually is sort of kind of there to control MIDI style actions. Don't buy an old keyboard, especially something from this sort of vintage, and expect it to have all the MIDI functions that you might want. If you bought something a little bit younger, then possibly you would have more functions there, because remember that the MIDI standard was ratified, or MIDI standard 1.0 was ratified in what, 83 or 84? Hence the reason why the original DX7 Mark I had a lot of the features, but it wasn't actually MIDI 1.0 compliant. Now, over the years, manufacturers have added things to the standard, but all MIDI keyboards are 1.0 compliant. They may have additional bits, but they're all 1.0 compliant. They have to be. That's the standard. And earlier this year, 2.0 was ratified. So for effectively the better part of 35 years, we've had one MIDI standard. But other manufacturers have gone off, as I said, they've added things in to the keyboards to allow them to do different things in a different way. And looking back at this, I would say if you're going to buy a MIDI keyboard, if you're going to buy a keyboard to control your MIDI setup, buy a MIDI keyboard. If you're going to buy a keyboard to play that you might use in a MIDI setup, by all means buy a legacy keyboard. But be very clear on why you're buying the keyboard. I hope that makes a lot of sense to people, because you can be bitterly disappointed if you buy a keyboard to use as a MIDI controller and find out that for some reason it doesn't transmit certain pieces of data, like, for argument's sake, a proper velocity curve. Next one comes from my good friend Gary over at the Death Beats. And this was in response to the video I did on Behringer, where I talked about giving people what they want. God, when was this? Oh, this was Christmas 2019. And Gary writes, and if you haven't checked out the Death Beats and you're into electronic dance music, go over and check him out. Might as well give him a shout out. Because he is actually rather good. Sorry, Gary. Back in the late 90s and early zeros, I was doing a lot of live shows with my drum and bass act, Rareform. So there you go, another plug for Gary. And also with the D&B rock band I put together. That's drum and bass, by the way. Which was signed to BMG via Kick-In Records. I actually played most of the keyboards live and some of the beats. I was frustrated not to be able to get a TB303 and a 909 for our live shows, as we just didn't have the budget for one of the many overpriced units on eBay. I often think how awesome it would have been back then if we'd had the new Behringer clones and also Aria and Boutique range. Our live shows would have been very much different had I had... very much different. I had to make do with an MC303. And it's very true, you know, the sort of where we're going now with the clones and the reimagined boxes. But you're not the only person to comment on the fact that the price of the original gear has really skyrocketed. And I said this a couple of times on the channel in either response or rants. You know, that if you look at it now, I've got a friend of mine who has an original 909. And he was offered recently $3,000 for it. That's £3,000, not dollars. And he won't sell it because he loves it too much. And I don't blame him. You know, why would you? I know somebody else who has an original 808, and they're currently going in good nick. The price of those is now increased to sort of £3,500 to £4,000. And some of the other vintage gear, I mean, a good Jupiter now, £8,000. Yeah, it's getting rather scary. So why wouldn't you? And I did a video, a rant about this, you know, pragmatist or purist, fairly recently, saying why would you not go and buy a clone if it gives you that sound that you're after in a new package that is 21st century technology as opposed to 1980s technology. But they have skyrocketed. I really am hoping that somebody picks up a Lindrum, an OBDMX, because they would be really fab to have in the stable, just for working with. I mean, I've got samples of the Lindrum. I've got samples of the Lindrum on my Kronos as well, but it's not the same as having a Lindrum. You know, and I've said this before, you know, the thing about samples is samples are great because they give you the sound, but you can't manipulate the source of the sound. You can manipulate the sample, but you can't manipulate the source. So you can't change the attack of the sample. You can't change the decay of the sample. You know, all those things you could do to the actual original sound, you can't really do to the sample because you've got a fixed point. So, you know, I would buy a Lin reimagined box, or buy an OB reimagined box. Behringer are just about to relaunch an OBXA. Now, I many years ago played an OBXA. I loved an OBXA. Would I buy the Behringer one? Probably. You know, if it's good enough and it stands and the keyboard is good, I might be tempted to go and buy an OBXA. If they did a rack mount version of it, I definitely would buy it. But you know, I used to go and play these synthesizers back in the day. I think I've said before, there was a shop in London called Rose Morris, and it's not the shop it used to be. There were two shops in London actually that were really great for keyboard players. One was Rose Morris. I enjoyed Rose Morris, even if the salesmen were sort of up their own backsides, and also. The other place I quite enjoyed, which was more focused on the sort of MIDI and recording, was Turnkey in Charing Cross Road. But both of them were great places to go and play instruments. They had the high-end gear in them, whereas a lot of the local shops to where I lived when I was growing up may have one or two of the flagship synthesizers, predominantly from their major supplier. So Project would carry the top-end Yamaha gear, but that was it. You wouldn't get anything else in there. So you know, you got to go to Rose Morris, and there was one particular floor where all these high-end synths would be, and you could go in there, grab a set of headphones, and sit there merrily playing for a couple of hours. But I didn't have deep pockets. I was a lowly trainee at that point in time with no money in my pockets, so none of these things got bought, which is probably why my love for legacy equipment has come from now, because, well, I don't have any money now either, but that's a different kettle of fish. Mind you, having one thought I will leave you with is those of you who've seen the size of the T1, and if you put the T1 in a flight case, which I have now got a T1 in a flight case, I think I probably would have been crippled by now had I been able to afford a T1 back in the day, because I just lifting the thing in and out of the car for gigs on my own, I probably would have broken my back. The thing was so heavy. I mean, now it's so heavy. I mean, the only thing I think is heavier is my A80. That is a monstrously heavy keyboard, and about the same size and weight. Good God! Oh well. Yeah. Mind you, having said that, I don't think the T1 would have fitted in my Capri. Yeah. Yes, I owned a Capri.